Sekiro, the shadows die twice. It's one of the coolest sounding names for a video game I've ever heard. Not long into my first playthrough did I find out why it got that name. Upon first figuring this out, I thought it was very clever, establishing the gameplay dynamic that sets Sekiro apart from its Souls-like counterparts in the From Software universe and beyond. Sekiro's in-lore explanation for why the protagonist and player can die as many times as they often will is one of the best and most creative, organic narrative reasons for respawning in video game history, along with fellow Sengoku-era triumph Nioh 2. These games together are perhaps the two greatest samurai games ever made, and I have often seen discussions about the hardest recent action RPGs linked to Sekiro and Nioh. I always felt guilty for not playing it until now, but I can now say for myself that Sekiro is not as hard as Nioh or even some of the other Souls-likes out there, and yet it is nonetheless an awesome experience. I found Sekiro to be a challenging game, to be sure, but certainly a well-balanced and user-friendly experience compared to some of the more hardcore designs, for better or worse, of the genre in recent memory. There's a lot of talk about the parry mechanic in Sekiro and how it can be troublesome for some players that have slower reactions and poorer hand-eye coordination. As a player myself, I often find myself becoming impatient, looking to brute force my way through a difficult encounter, and growing more frustrated the less effective that strategy becomes. In recent years, I've become more strategic when playing these types of games so I can cut down on my resurrections. Sekiro forces you to play in one particular style with one weapon in hand, and if you so choose, an arsenal of supplemental prosthetic utensils in the other. It's through this restrictive yet refined concept that Sekiro cultivates not only some of the best swordplay ever done, but one of the most responsive combat systems I think I've seen in the genre and in general. It's for this reason that Sekiro is unquestionably a great game, and also why I think Sekiro might be too easy. In Sekiro, you can choose to run down the clock, defensively and tactically chipping away at HP and slowly lowering the capacity of posture. Or you can play more aggressively and risky, which is oftentimes the smartest move, by reacting with tempo to each perilous attempt on your life by the enemy, breaking their posture with momentum against the inertia of their own weight. Nioh introduced this mechanic prior to the release of Sekiro, and they went even further in Nioh 2. But in some ways, it does feel like it's tailor-made for this style of action game. Sekiro is not a true RPG, and that's okay, because the moment you start to double-tap X and get airborne, you're glad the genre has vertically evolved. There is a spectacular flow to each combat encounter, whether in the small fights against trash mobs or in the graceful yet brutish bosses that gatekeep the main story, which by the way is incredible. Easily one of the best written, most emotional and mature narratives in the series, and in such a game with this particular subject matter. The visual and auditory telegraphs of each clash of steel on steel shows you exactly when you have parried perfectly or been parried in return. And it's a splendor, the feeling of forcing that momentum back at your opponent, staggering them into an opening for you to slide your own blade through their chest or their neck. There's fluidity in the way that Sekiro actually allows you to interrupt combos and get enemies in stun locks, and occasionally there are a few unblockable attacks that make their way through, potentially punishing greed. Sekiro is a two-way street where the first one to strike is not always rewarded. It's here that every kanji of death is earned, given the fact that you always die twice, if not 3 times, before the fight is over. And it's for this reason that Sekiro is a relatively easy game, because to truly die in Sekiro means you have made too many mistakes, that you've squandered the forgiving respawn system and miscalculated your moves in battle. Hesitation is defeat. Going into a fight in Sekiro is pretty straightforward. You already know how to approach a situation, so you just need to learn the patterns and have the courage to execute the particulars. Sekiro's battles have rhythm, and there's plenty of variety in the techniques available in both open-world combat and the death matches inside of crumbling palaces set ablaze, atop the majestic temple skylines, and in the Valley of Death. These are beautiful environments from an iconic art style that shows how gorgeous the ceremonial Japan really is, with a touch of imagination. And with the final game destination, the Fountainhead, being one of the best looking areas in any game I think we've ever seen. In Sekiro, stealth is an important mechanic, although it is largely optional as it means to give a more authentic feeling of role-playing as a shinobi at a time when they were at their most notorious. The stealth sections help to make crowded areas easier to navigate, allowing battles to unfold very differently, quietly, as you pick off guards on patrol one by one, and it also provides a means to farm quickly in late game situations, as well as reducing, most importantly, one of the death blows required for sub-bosses, as the game just offers a free health bar, which somewhat trivializes these encounters. It's an accessibility feature that constitutes both good design and combat variety, and I think a very balanced and fun integration that shows the right way to mix stealth and action together. Special abilities can be utilized in such interactions, such as the blood-soaked ninjutsu, which douses the room with a smokescreen of bloodshed, shrouding the shinobi from his prey, allowing him to strike the same place multiple times. Puppeteer ninjutsu allows you to turn enemies into allies for support, and in certain situations, to aid in performing secret actions that unlock new locations or help complete one of many outlandish questlines that take crazy turns you'd never predict otherwise. What's great about Sekiro's stealth is it's just a small part of Wolf's tool bag, a tactic that you never need to or have to rely on, just something to give the player more choice and more freedom. The same goes for the 10 unique prosthetic tools in each of their enhancements that are as well completely supplementary to Sekiro's blade, yet extremely useful against certain types of enemies. I personally rarely relied on any of these to get through a fight, especially since they have scarce uses in battle, but they can provide a much needed advantage depending on the circumstances, and I must praise the creativity and resourcefulness of these prosthetics. Perhaps not since Devil May Cry 4 and Devil May Cry 5, which released at nearly the exact same time, has there been a more creative and enjoyable way of floating through environments than Sekiro's grappling hook, arm, that doubles as his Swiss Army knife. Sekiro's progression system is mild and its quests are few, but each aspect is impactful. Your actions feel as though they carry weight, as the more you die, dragon rot spreads throughout Ashina like the plague, infesting your friends and allies alike. You bear witness to the sickly coughs and wheezing of the poor inhabitants, knowing it is of your doing. They can never die directly from this illness, but it can halt the progression of their quests and make you feel like you've abandoned your duty to protect the land. You can be kind and lend a helping hand to NPCs or engage in devious forms of backstabbing and trickery by exploiting your reputation for trustworthiness as a shinobi. Even though I suppose shinobis aren't very trustworthy. The economy has been scaled back in Sekiro to make items less expensive and money harder to earn. When you end up with a few thousand sen, you feel like you're carrying some heavy pockets. Sekiro dies twice, but when you die, you lose up to half of your resources, a harsh penalty that seems like a completely fair ratio. The skill trees in Sekiro's combat arts offer a different perspective on spending XP in the form of unlock points, which is nuanced compared to simply farming for a one-size-fits-all currency. There's some interesting moves that can be unlocked here. Nothing that fundamentally alters how Sekiro operates, but enough to add extra flair and show that the wolf has more than a few tricks up his sleeve. Many of these are acquired and recycled from enemies, which leads me to one of my criticisms of Sekiro, that many of the open world sub-bosses are copy and pasted throughout Ashina, simply repositioned in latter game stages with a different name, sometimes a different skin, but identical movesets. Perhaps they do this because they really want you to better learn by practicing, but reusing the same enemies is lazy compared to the awesome main boss fights that each function slightly differently with a different pace. Take the memorable Shinobi Owl fights, one of which is mandatory and the other a more complex optional fight for an alternate ending, which is the one I consider to be the best. Both for practical and thematic reasons, fighting your father the second time around is more thrilling, as it shows you that the first fight, as hard as it can be, was just a tutorial, that the slightly younger owl, and just a step quicker, is the real deal and your perfect match. The camera work, composed of wide-angle shots and close-ups, is masterful, and showing that gigantic oaf of a man as he unravels his sanity and his depraved true intentions as a last resort, dwarfing his people in size but not ambition, as Sekiro breaks the code but not his morals.
なんと情けないことか。
Lord Ishin Ashna, another character whose reputation precedes him, presents different obstacles for each version of him that you face, but the same feeling of lament. Fight the senior citizen and he's deceptively quick, with the fire still burning within. Fight the reincarnated sword saint and you get an intimate three-pronged battle against a mighty soldier who takes no prisoners. Sekiro is precocious at showing us little clues and hints through its dialogue that foreshadows and contextualizes all of the characters that we will be dealing with as both friend and foe. The cantankerous old man, perceived to have become so frail that he's incapable of defending his kingdom on the brink of collapse, disguises himself as a Tengu, hunting and slaughtering intruders in the middle of the night, intruders that we know from experience are no pushovers. He dubs the protagonist Sekiro, the one-armed wolf, which is somehow endearing coming from the legend who built an empire and knows everything there is to know about warfare. He entrusts you with fighting on his behalf as his successor, favoring you over the corrupted heir to his own bloodline. Ishin shows himself to be an honorable man through his recollections of past events, detailing the fools who sought infinite power, an element he is wise enough to know himself is fleeting. Ishin vows with his last breath to defend not the land of Ashna that bears his namesake, but the innocent child who was sought out to be harvested for his divine blood. The final fight with the noble Ishin is an honor because we get to challenge a mentor and earn a legendary warrior as our ultimate opposition. It's also sad because we know that he never wanted things to turn out this way, but we heed his famous warning: hesitation is defeat. Ishin's battle is one of my favorite in the From Software library, an awesome fight visually and mechanically, stringing together everything the game has taught you thus far as poetry in motion. None of the fights in Sekiro are daunting if you pay attention to how the game adeptly and subtly telegraphs its hand. I beat some of these bosses on my first try, and Ishin took me about the third try to get the best of him. And as I've said though, difficulty isn't everything it's cracked up to be in a video game. Design is key, and Sekiro has a polished design which I enjoy and admire. The characters and settings are also very appealing to me too. There's the altruistic Dr. Emma, sworn to serve Lord Ishin in the Divine Heir, as well as the hate-harboring sculptor who is a friend to us because he can't help but see Sekiro as a younger, slightly wiser version of himself. Both of these friends potentially become enemies depending on the path Sekiro chooses. Emma's antagonizing nature is chillingly hinted at when Sekiro asks her why she is trained in the art of a sword. She nervously laughs it off, explaining that she is trained in the arts of combat in preparation of a demon showing up, one she hopes she will not live to see. Both she and Ishin believe that you will be the one to slay such demons if they arise, with that demon of hatred being a certain man they call the orangutan. Sekiro absorbs us into its alternate history retelling of the end of the Sengoku period through the servitude of the sweet and innocent Lord Kuro, a child born with extraordinary power who had the responsibility to put others first. It's an intriguing spin on archetypes of feudal storytelling, where a vassal's loyalty is tested to his master, in this case, a boy who just wants to live a normal life. Sekiro has the most direct and organic narrative in the From Software universe, a story told through mostly coherent cutscenes, and the revealing subtext of dialogue that draws us into this world in this iconic period of the samurai and the shinobi. If I'm underselling the difficulty of Sekiro, it's not because I have oversight of some of the game's additional modifiers, which do deserve praise. The Game of the Year edition introduced a much essential feature often missing from this type of game: the ability to replay boss battles separate from the main story progression, as well as the boss rush gauntlet endurance test. These are fantastic features that every game of this kind should have, because being able to practice and try new tactics on bosses, a game's greatest challenge, is the essence of replay. Of course, there is Kuro's charm, which necessitates perfect blocking to avoid chip damage, and the demon bell, which makes enemies a bit more tanky, I assume. I wouldn't say that these make Sekiro harder than it needs to be, as getting perfect parries is rather simple by design. This isn't a true challenge like, say, Neo 2 on Dream of the Neo with a Stone of Penance +9, where all enemies regenerate 2000 HP per second. Sekiro doesn't have crazy builds that would scale up your damage more than it should be, which again shows that Sekiro chose refinement over scale. However, that is why I also think that Sekiro should be viewed separately from its successors that do provide more combat variety. Features such as robust co-op and extensive build mechanics, because they simply have more quantity in addition to quality. Sekiro is also a brief game compared to Elden Ring, of course, and even Bloodborne, I'd say. And of course, every one of these games is unique in their own ways. Sekiro is near perfect in its own design, and I think a 9 out of 10 overall. Sekiro is a great game. I was hesitant to give Bloodborne the label of masterpiece because I always sensed the genre had more room to grow. Of course, I am vindicated by the fact that Neo and Elden Ring now exist, with something like Wolong on the way. Sekiro is a fantastic standalone achievement, synthesizing a wide array of combat styles that blend together so well down into one signature. Sekiro is a game that I'm glad I got to play, and a game I certainly enjoyed playing more than twice.
そう、赤炉よ。迷えば破れるぞ。